Hi, everyone, and welcome to Uncensored Hot Femme. Today, I have my first man here, Joshua Wenner, that I jumped into his DMs. Actually, on the day I released my Pain and Pleasure episode, because I was talking about victim consciousness, and I happened to see Joshua release a post. I don't know if you have released any before, but it just caught my attention. And I had Joshua on my desire list of the men I wanted to join my podcast. So without even thinking, I just jumped into his DMs and like wrote a long message. And I think I even made a comment like I DM'd you. And you said yes, like after 5 minutes or something. And I was like, what? Don't you want to check me up? Before even saying yes. But I'm so happy that you did. And now you are here. And why I follow you, Joshua, is because I think you are making it so like tangible around, being a high value woman and how to speak to men, how to, raise your standards and so on. You make it very tangible that I like about the stuff that you do. But then also you're so multifaceted. Like I remember have been following you for a while and saw like the stuff around your past that you have been working with grief and like just popping up different things from you. Um, and then, like I said to Joshua before we started, after inviting you to this podcast, I checked out your webpage and I'm like, oh my God, you are doing many different things. But working, you talk about being integrated and embodiment. And yeah, I'll just leave it up to you to tell me more in depth who you are with your own words.
Yeah, I'm great. First, I'm grateful to be here. Thanks for reaching out and having the courage to reach out and trusting your impulse. Second, I really appreciate how the content resonates with you because that feels really good of like it's more tangible. It's in it like it's more action oriented. Like what do you do? How do you integrate these pieces? So thank you so much for feeling that because that's really what the intent behind it is. A lot of the work I end up doing now is more integrative work, meaning I still train people that come that are like wanting to learn the fundamentals, but oftentimes they know a lot, but they're not doing it or they're still attracting unhealthy patterning. So that to me is more the integrative work. And I really see myself more as an integrated coach now where I'm helping. I know all the things. Why aren't they working? Is oftentimes because we haven't integrated them into the body yet. And helping with the integration means we actually shift the patterning and we're either attracted to different or we attract different or we say no to things that we previously said yes to because we've shifted, not necessarily the outside world. And yeah, just really right now I'm currently most passionate about helping women. So often in dating, whether it's an attraction or the dating process or intimate relationships. But previously to that, I did a decade of men's work and held men's containers, often helping men go into deep grief. So, reframing grief and loss as a place of power and learning to build tools to really regulate your emotions, learn how to go in and feel and be with past pain and trauma, and really become more integrated, right? So, helping men do the integrative work for a decade. I also did men's rites of passage the last 5 years because it was a natural progression of like, oh, why do we have to do so much integrative work is we were never shown the way, like we didn't have good male role models. And if that's the case with men, I'm also seeing that's the case with women, right?
Mm.
So we're a culture that doesn't have a lot of integrated role models, and so we're doing the best we can with the tools we have, which means we oftentimes just recreate family dynamics
Yeah.
and we just replay them again and again and again. So I still do work with fire, police, military, first responders on tools to really deal with what they're doing emotionally. I have a film that I spent a decade documenting my journey called The Gift of Grief. So that's where all my work stems from is really the grief work underneath it all. But it seems like the crux of my work now is how do we be in healthy relationship with self, which is really the deep work.
Yeah.
And the more I'm in relationship with self, I can have healthy relationships with others, and that becomes my standard. And what creates healthy family units. Now we actually can shift the generational programming that happened to us. So, but it starts with us, and that's really my passion.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. What I would love to start to ask you is like, you said 10 years of recording this film. What did you say? Gift of Grief?
The gift of grief, yes.
Gift of Grief, yeah. And what led you up to, and recording it for 10 years? That's really dedicated.
Yeah, so I'd say like a big part of my journey started in 2007. My brother came to see me. He'd been shooting heroin and came to see me like things have gotten difficult. I'm shooting heroin. Things have gotten out of control. I got to come live with you or I'm gonna go back. If I feel like if I go back to Reno, I'm gonna die. And I told him no. I had a startup company that I was busy building and told him no. And he went back to Reno and died 2 days later from an overdose. So I feel like that started my journey of essentially a deep grief that I couldn't fix in myself. Um, I did what I knew how to do back then, which was put it in a box. Went and helped my family take care of the services and things around my parents, and then came back and went to work on my startup. And then the startup came crashing down a year later when the market fell apart. And came home one day to my business partner running off with my girlfriend. So I lost my business partner, my girlfriend, my best friend, the company had to claim bankruptcy. So I went through like a bunch of losses all at once, in addition to my brother. And I did what the same tool set I had, which was like, all right, how do I fix this? I was very much in a fixed focus mindset early on because I believed what a strong man was the man who didn't sit in his mess. He just got back up quickly and handled things. And so I was like, who's the best in the world? At the time, I thought it was Tony Robbins, and I still have so much respect and admiration from him. But I really immersed myself in Tony's work as one of his. I was one of a team of 5 speakers and trainers that would travel around the country. And in that process, it was all about mindset tools. So NLP, hypnosis, changing your state, changing the meaning. But the focus was about essentially how to fix. I don't want to feel this way. How do I feel good so I can get the result I want, which was more peak performance? So I thought I fixed myself, healed myself. I did all the tools to interact with life. And then I started helping around grief, like grief and death and loss kept showing up. And I started to help people and thought I could fix it all and failed miserably at first. And was like, maybe I don't know what I'm doing. And that's what led me to start researching grief and loss to help them because I was fixed,
Ah,
help them
okay.
fix their grief. And then along the way, as I was documenting my journey, I realized, oh, wait, I haven't dealt with my grief. And so essentially, it was a documentation of it's my story, really, my personal story of starting out kind of stuck in the head, going on these interviews to try to help others, and then realizing I was the one that needed help. And it evolves through more talk into like concepts of understanding grief so I could be more acceptable with my grief. And then moving into more somatics and getting in the body and moving energy in the body, which then led me to actually get to a place of feeling like when I could really go there in myself. I started to find these parts of me that I could be there with myself. I felt this deep peace, and it was like, how do I start to help others experience this? And so I just kept living my life as it moved into helping men and first responders, but then I just kept documenting it. So I think the 10-year film was really my healing process. If I have to like look at it, it was more of a healing. And then at some point when I was more in completion of that journey is when the film was ready to be completed. Like, okay, I'm now complete with this season. It's now able to put it out into the world and not be attached to it. So I just got blessed that I could document my family and I's journey and, turn it into art, essentially take my most painful experience and turn it into art and put it into the world around a messy subject where most people run from. But how do we have a little bit more levity around grief? Because it's part of all of our experience that we never get away from. And that'll continue to show up every time we move through change.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm a woman, I'm not a man. So I mean, the fixing thing, although I've been wanting to fix things too. You said so many good things I want to hook into, but if we start with the mindset piece, because I mean, obviously your journey have been so much longer than mine, and on a okay surface level, working with Tony Robbins mindset, I mean, on paper, that's kind of a big thing for me. That. Um, yeah, I guess you understand how I mean, but to really, find the depth of going into the body and truly to see how, as you said, it was peak performance. And I like to say it's painting gold on shit because you're just, making the surface shiny and then you're just stuffing everything down. And this is just a thought and like, especially as a man, as you say, to fix things and to not feel. And I also saw on your webpage, like you have a program too for the warriors and PTSD or something. Yeah. So I mean, it's so important that you're really the wisdom of your work. As you say, it was the healing journey about recording and making the grief into art. And I think those pieces that we push away, death, for me, it has been a journey in my sexuality that's been quite taboo, and and the seasons, so to really you wanted to help others, that's beautiful. But to realize that, like it's me too. It's me too. But actually to lean into it. So you really you helped others and yourselves. I mean, that's so beautifully intertwined. So I think the first thing I would like to hook into is, especially as men, that's why I want men on the podcast, because I mean, I didn't grow up as a man. So, and everyone has their own life stories. So, I mean, we are unique individuals too, of course. But if I could share my perspective as a woman, oh my God, I don't know why I feel so emotional, but especially these last years, maybe it's as woman too, kind of sometimes, as you say, it's a relationship with ourselves. But me as a woman wanting to kind of latch on to the strong masculine man, and I call them the masculine mirage because they are very stoic. They are the warriors. And I'm like, but you're still so much up in your head. They are very disconnected. And those are the men, especially these last years, that I have been attracting and been attracted to. And I'm like, as a man, if you would just, go deeper into this, because I also see it as something beautiful. I like the warrior archetype is also beautiful, but like, could you debunk this with me?
Yeah, so to go a little bit deeper is I find we're always attracting essentially where we're at. So what I see is just the patterning because I just study patterns. So we can unpack the story, but the story will leave clues to what's underneath, which is the patterning. And so all stories kind of go back to patterns. So if we track the patterning, I find oftentimes with men, what we're lacking in ourselves is nurture. So the stronger a man is, the more he potentially lacks the ability to nurture himself. So if he can be really strong and he can really nurture himself, that's essentially his masculine feminine, right? So the strong, protective type, the man that can lead and direct, the man that is really clear in where he's going, that has a lot of masculine energy. It takes a lot of work to then develop, let's call it his more nurturing side, his feminine side, his ability to feel, his ability to be more embodied in his body. Whereas oftentimes the men that can be very embodied sometimes lack the directional focus or the ability to lead and direct or to be clear or even protect. So oftentimes with men, it's learning how to either nurture themselves or actually go and get into that action orientation. With women, I find it's flipped where it's oftentimes safety. So I see with women, it's also learning how can I create safety for myself, or do I need him to create safety for me? So as an example, if you're saying I'm really attracted to the strong masculine men, there may be an element of like physical safety, like, oh, I feel so safe when he's here, but now I'm craving more emotional safety and he doesn't have those tools.
Mm.
Versus the man might be attracting you saying, like, oh, I want the nurture because he hasn't developed as much ability to nurture himself. So initially you're starting off attracting each other to fill those gaps, which is very common, right? We start there kind of like, oh, what am I giving to get in a sense? And then at some point, if it's not fulfilling, it's like, okay, what are the deeper parts in me that I have to integrate those pieces so that I'm not necessarily looking for the piece to fill the gap, but to open me or integrate me to something deeper. So I guess that was the first thing that kind of came up around it. If the pattern is attracting strong, safe, physically masculine men, but tend to be more stoic or less embodied, then my question around that would be like, what are you, two things. Um, well, first, like what seems to be missing? What's the pattern that shows up that seems to be missing? It sounds like it's lack of like emotional presence or lack of, is that fair?
Yeah, and I can say that um yeah, I probably was turned on by them before, but then it came a period where I couldn't feel turned on in that sense because I need the emotional connection, but I still had this era of saying yes to them. And that's, I think it comes from my savior complex because it hurts to look at someone like you really want them to open their heart and I think today a lot of men that I have met talk about feelings, but they are talking about the feelings, but I can't feel the connection. And, so for me, I've been thinking because I believe that people are our mirrors. So I say that no matter if someone comes into the dynamic to, do the work with me, I still reflect myself in them, as you say, to see, okay, so what was I lacking since I said yes to this? So it always becomes a learning experience. Um, but to be honest, I'm pretty fucking tired of learning all the time too. But
Totally.
yeah, so I've done so much healing around my inner masculine and like the mirroring in men and like I do like that a man is decisive, have direction, and I don't mean that he have to be emotional like me, but I think there's a part of me this coming up. It's probably part of the savior complex too, where you kind of, even when you're aware, want to change the other person. It's kind of subconscious that you sometimes don't even notice it because I always like I don't want to save anyone anymore. And like still I can see in hindsight that oh fuck, I was actually trying to, you know because I'm triggered sometimes I don't even notice and like maybe they are coming out breadcrumbs of emotional connection and like so I think as you say the start to say no to things like to the
Mhm.
breadcrumbs and I think for me as someone who has a big heart it sometimes feel like leaving someone behind and then I have to deal with my emotions around that like so but choosing yourself. Mm. But I think for the men that are listening, if any men are listening, like how can you be embodied in a healthy way in your warrior archetype or whatever archetype we want to call it?
Yeah, and but there's two pieces, so I want to pull on the thread a little bit because I'm glad that you brought it up. Is there's this is what I see oftentimes is in women is there's a moment of intuition that gets bypassed, dismissed, or overridden, and so that's the really early piece. Is if at some level we're like something's a no or something's like but then I override it. Sounds like for you, which is super common, is like, oh, what can I make him change, or what can I do to shift this, or can I be the one to open his heart, right? Which is in most even movies, right? They display a woman who goes in and opens the masculine's heart, right? So there's a desire to open it, which often falls back to father, I think, is one of the patterning. So I just wanted to really put a note there because really trusting your intuition and saying no to whatever doesn't feel like a yes, even if it checks all the boxes, will guide you to where you need to go. So that's one of the crux I found is really trusting intuition. But it can be hard when we're getting pulled or something's really hot or these pattern shows up to get pulled in this direction. So I wanted to really highlight that though, because that's what I find now with a lot of the training I'm doing women is just guiding back to your body to really trust your body over anything else in your environment. The second piece is if it's focused more on men, men often they become their father or they become the opposite of their father. So oftentimes with man, if a man's not integrated, integration means he has both power and peace. Most of what we're seeing is the man who's powerful, but kind of takes and consumes and walks on and doesn't care, or the man who's peaceful but has no power and can get walked on. And so men are oftentimes observing their father, their first example of masculinity. And if he didn't have rites of passage and learn how to be an integrated man, then they're seeing how he dealt with his father and the men in his lineage. So we're multiple generations of men observing unconsciously what their father was. So if my dad's powerful, meaning he's going to lean into conflict, he's going to lean into potentially anger, what's acceptable, then I'm either going to match him and get more angry than him or get more savage than him to beat him, or I'm going to go the opposite and go into peace to try to create a peace dynamic. And the flip side, if a man is peaceful, his father's the peaceful gentleman that maybe gets walked on, then man's either going to replicate the same thing or he's going to become savage and almost attack his father and say, like, I'm never going to be like that again. So I wanted to start there because in order for a man to integrate parts of himself, he first has to get curious and figure out, like, what's my wiring? Where am I, where did I model? Who am I modeling right now? And find some good examples of how to navigate that. So we use examples of the king, warrior, lover, magician. So it gives you kind of four archetypes to figure out where to move into and to figure out where I'm out of alignment. So a man that needs more warrior, as you mentioned, oftentimes he could be strong in his lover, or he could be strong in his, let's call it magician house, but he might be weak in his king or his warrior. And so he's just going to have to develop those parts of him. And the man that's strong in his warrior and his king may be weak in his lover, which is maybe what you describe. A man who's really strong warrior, protector, provider. King is like the charismatic guy, right? The charismatic, playful. He could tell great jokes. He'd be charismatic. Lover's more of the heart connection. That's emotional attunement. That's ability to be with his own emotions, emotionally regulate, feel other individuals and actually be there presently. And then the magician is more like plan, process, procedure, right? He can get into the details. So for me, it's as a man, you're saying what is the situation called for and who do I need to be?
Mm.
Which part of me do I need to step into to handle this situation? And I find we're really strong in a couple and we're really weak in a couple. So it takes building the parts that are weak in us that make us stronger and more versatile to step into those roles. So a man that wants more warrior is going to have to work on boundaries. He's going to have to work on stepping into conflict. He's going to have to work on saying no a lot more to build his warrior archetype because that's what the warrior does. Black and white, I'm on a mission. You're with us or against us, right? It's very much that mindset. But a man who lives in that is going to have trouble on the flip side of the lover being like open and connected in relationships and feelings. They're like, what are feelings? I'm on a mission. Like, I don't have time for this. So learning how to integrate those parts of him becomes a lot more versatile, right? And so that would be more integrative qualities of like, in order to do that, he's going to have to look under his past. He's going to have to face parts of himself he may not have faced in order to build those deeper pieces.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that so good. And I had that book, but I gave it to a man. In
Great.
hopes that he would read it. I don't even know if he read it. So that's it's so funny. But yeah. Yeah. So essentially what you're saying is that we need to balance everything out by integrating those different pieces and pull them out in the right moments and the right situations, right?
Yeah, like what's the situation calling for and can I access those parts, right? And let's say it's flipped for a woman. It's slightly different for a woman, but even if I use those same archetypes, how like can a woman communicate her boundaries very clear? Like oftentimes I find a woman will like contract a little bit and she'll go into like there's these big sides of either taking up a lot of space and jumping into conflict and being on like I'm going to tell you the way it is,
Yes.
or it's like the opposite where it's contracting, not speaking up, kind of saying yes to whatever happens and not feeling seen and heard for the experience. And so we also have to integrate on both sides, right? So what does the situation need? Do I need to be more loving, more nurturing, more curious? Do I need to be more regulating my own emotions versus wanting somebody else to do them for me or wanting, that's a common one that happens. Like, oh, I need him to be this way so I can feel regulated versus learning how to just bring what you need for you. Oftentimes a woman will make it a man's fault. And it's even in the collective quite a bit right now of like, I just need a man to do these things so I can be here.
Mhm.
Now, yes, that helps. So I don't want to invalidate it at all. And if we're waiting for that to give us the reason to do it, now we're back in victim and we need, and whether he does it or not means whether we're safe or not versus taking more sovereignty to say, oh no, I'm going to honor all those pieces in me. And the more I can honor them in me, the more I appreciate that in somebody else because they can also do the same thing with them. Right. So I think we're evolving out of codependency as a culture, which we're all born into. Right. We needed to be certain ways in childhood or we didn't get our needs met. And so we adapted, and those adaptations are the masks we wear, and we often attract from the masks that are playing off family dynamics versus relaxing those back to be our full integrated selves where we can attract more from that place.
Yeah, I hear you. And yes, I'm so happy that you are bringing this up. And essentially, also, if we think about the feminine being the energetics and like the frequency, that means like we are actually the power igniting something. So, how could ever the masculine go first, really? Like, if you think about it. But yeah, and I am aware of this, and still sometimes, when the rage comes up or the hurt comes up, I do notice that I do villainize men, even though I'm so aware, and I have to double check myself all the time. And I think also it's because on the flip side, I can go into taking all the blame, and that doesn't work for me either. So it's really a balance of validating our hurt, I think. Because I mean, the people that ghost you, reject you, your father, patriarchy, whatever we want to say, they will not come to my door and apologize to me. But that doesn't mean that I don't feel hurt because I do. I mean, from generations back, it's in my nervous system. It's in me, and I can't wait for someone to heal it. Although I do think that when we are willing, we can help each other to
Mhm.
do this work. And I think
Mhm.
that can be powerful because we can reflect ourselves in each other and we can help each other, support each other. I mean, as long as it's in balance, I think, because I think there is also something from the Love and Light Love and Light community that like it feels like the women were supposed to heal everyone and like um and and like no, we don't come and find a man and like heal him and he opens his heart. Like it all comes back to Disney or all those crazy Delulu things we think about. But yeah, and I agree. So we all have to be integrated because I mean, no one is meant to mother or father you. That wouldn't even be a good dynamic to have a really true soulful love in. And I don't know if you remember, I answered one of your stories one day, and it had me thinking like, I think we are in a time like, yes, shit have happened and we have problems, but should we focus on whose fault it is, or should we start co-creating the solution together? Because I mean, we could sit here and I mean that's the whole reason I started this podcast. Like for me, around thinking also like around feminism, and I always see the pendulum swing. If we go to one extreme and then we have the red pill movement, and like it just becomes a never ending. I think we have to really get down to what do we want? What kind of
Mhm.
world do we want? What kind of relationships do we want? And of course, I don't think everyone is willing to meet themselves because honestly, it feels like I've been to hell and back sometimes um, to really reclaim myself. I feel like I've been reborn from darkness, like um, and honestly, I don't think maybe everyone is willing to do that work. I don't know how you think around it.
Yeah, I mean that's the integrative work. Integrative work is you have to contain your energy and be with the parts of ourself that we didn't get to be with in childhood. That's the deep like healing work. And I feel like on the healing work side, it's hard. It's really challenging to be with big painful emotions. Like we have to sit with if we were abandoned, if we got neglected, if we didn't feel loved, we didn't feel like we got rejected. Like there's these big emotions that we didn't always feel in childhood and they get trapped in us. And then in relationships, we wonder why we're recreating family dynamics is because there's this well of emotion that we're unconsciously replaying again and again and again, trying to get a different result. And so the deep integrative work comes from containing our energy, not going for the quick hit or the validation hit or from the savior hit or the victim hit or whatever we're doing to try to fill the space with us, which is really what we're doing. We don't want to be with us at some level. And so we're doing something to avoid being with us because us is I got all this messy pain that I don't want to deal with, or I feel all this deep sadness, or I feel this anger, or whatever I'm feeling. I want to go put it somewhere or go to the shiny object or get attention, or we're doing something to distract. And when we can contain our energy in a safe way to allow ourselves to be with those big emotions and find ways to move those through our body, it creates more spaciousness. And when we have more spaciousness within, we start to enjoy spending time with us. We're not looking for something to take us away from those moments. We're actually looking for something to meet us more deeply in those moments. And that's really the integrative work. The integrative work is courageous. It takes a warrior, both a man or a woman warrior, to go into the depths of pain to be with those parts of self, but they're already there. Like it's in there regardless. So we're either going to do the work to face it and to be with it and to learn to love those parts of self, or we're going to continue to run from it in dynamics, which are oftentimes like this. I use a description like power dynamics, big highs and then big crashing lows. And we're either experiencing this, which replicates childhood, right? Or when we do the integrative work, I find what shows up is we want more consistency, we want more stabilization, we want more peace and communication and how we communicate. And so we're less attractive to these dynamics and we're more attracted to like the slow, subtle dynamics, which can feel boring if we like this.
Yeah.
So that's what starts to shift in the nervous system is the ownership of, oh, I've been attracting or saying yes to. Because sometimes like you're going to attract whoever you're going to attract. But it's when we say yes to things that are this dynamic that don't feel like our truth that we got to hit, not this is a no, but then we future pace. Well, maybe they could be this way in the future. Or we get a hit that it's a no and then we dismiss it off. We like, oh, you're crazy. Or we don't listen to ourselves. Or we're focused on what they're saying from here, not actually feeling in here, because somebody may think they've done all the integrative work and have all the language, but they haven't actually done the work. But
Oh
they don't
my
know it.
God. Thank you for saying that, Joshua, because
Yeah.
this is something also when I started my podcast, and I've been mindfucked by it so many times because a lot of men, sorry, but many men, I feel like, at least in my experience, because they are more from mindset, I feel like. Not saying that it's an overall truth, but they know all the lingo. So it's like, oh my God, I met him. He's willing, he's doing the work. It's like, and I'm like, just witnessing the disconnection from the words and the actions and you so much want to believe someone. You want to you know, you see the potential in someone and you're like, okay, if we're both willing. But what comes up for me is I think, especially as women, that we give men like wifey treatment before they ever earned it. Because there's one thing to be that understanding when you're in a relationship, when you're already like chosen each other, I think, to actually do it in maybe the dating process where we actually, especially as women, should be more of a quick no when we feel it's just not meeting our needs or wants or desires. I don't know how you're thinking around this.
Yeah, so I have two different thoughts around that. One is I see the same thing with women. So it's for me, it's not gender related. It's human related. Who's actually done the actual integrative work? Because it's fucking hard. So I've seen the flip side where somebody will say all the language, but it's moment of conflict, they revert back to their pattern, right? So you see how it shows up. If you've done the integrative work, you're not disappearing. You're not getting overly anxious and like attacking. You're not projecting. You're doing the integrative work to take space, feel what's coming up for you and communicate in really loving ways. So to me, I just want to normalize it's men and women because the integrative work is how kind are you? Do you run from your like so somebody that's listening, a couple of questions to ask is if they may be saying, I've done all the work, but how do you show up in conflict? Are you showing up leaning in? Are you communicating your needs? Are you communicating your boundaries? Are you listening to your heart? Are you having hard conversations or are we running from those? There's a lack of integration, right? If we're are we flying off the handle and attacking or like are we becoming the angry kind of like more on the villain part? Then we haven't done as much integration work. So, right. So in big pieces, like have we done it first? Second piece would be because there is a big frame where I see like, oh, do I wait to show the wifey treatment? Right. But there's a underlying, how would I describe this? It'd be let me do it from the man's perspective. If I wait to if I naturally like to give and I'm naturally like I like to provide, I like to lead, I like to do these things, but I'm going to wait to see if she's potentially wife before I do those, then I'm waiting to show who I actually am before. So when are we going to get to? And and I've seen the same thing. So that's why I'm really glad you brought it up because as a man who's done a lot of work in my own dating, this is what I've seen is I see women who are very much in their feminine, but then I hear them saying, "Oh, I don't turn on my wifey nurturing until I'm in a relationship." And I'm like, "Well, I'm showing you who I am because I like to give." Like if I'm naturally going to lead and I'm naturally going to take care of you, I'm showing you now who I am. I'm not going to keep waiting till we're together long enough to see who you are. I find when you've done the work, you're naturally doing it because you like to give it. It's not because you're wanting to get something, if that makes sense. So for me, if I waited to give and be generous until I waited to see if she was wifey, now I'm not giving my gifts and I'm waiting to see are we going to have equal exchange versus I just slow things way down. And you can almost, I find you find in the first couple of dates, like you're finding very quickly because people are who they are. Like they are their level of integration from my perspective. So if somebody's very nurturing and knows, like as a woman, if she can both be in like her like pleasure, like her feminine would be like pleasure, sensation, receptivity, I feel much more seen and met. And I feel like she can both have awareness and be in her pleasure at the same time. So what that means is she's done enough integrative work because if a woman's fully in her feminine, she doesn't actually have awareness. She's in the full like
Yes.
sensations and aliveness and like this feels so good and she's just which is beautiful.
But
But I
scary.
find the flip side is if I'm a man who can just handle things, then I find a woman will soften a lot and just get to be in the experience, which is beautiful. But if she hasn't developed enough of her masculine, then she can't see what's happening and why it's happening and become actually receptive to the moment to see what I'm creating and doing to support her in that. So it almost feels like it's about her. Does that make sense? Versus the
Yeah.
distinguishing of a woman who can feel it all very intentionally and then go, oh, I'm noticing what he's doing and I can show him that receptivity. It feels met much earlier on versus just a woman who will be in her receptivity, or let's call it one feels like maiden or princess and one feels more like a queen. And so I think on the flip side, from the masculine of masculine men who've done the work, that's what we're kind of feeling like of like, hey, I'm going to go slow and really subtly see who somebody is. And if it's not in alignment, then I'm going to shift it much earlier versus waiting way down the road to get there. But I would say, how do we be very generous in who we are at all times and just slow the process down to say,
Oh,
are we receptive to each other? And the more we slow it down, you can see the subtlety because the subtlety is where you're going to notice, oh, is he still leading the conversation? Is he leading to get to know me? Is he showing up generously? And again, it could be with his emotion, it could be with his time, it could be financially. Like you're going to see the subtlety, or is he not able to meet me yet? Then it just kind of starts to show you where you're at. Does that make sense as I'm talking through that a little bit?
yeah.
Because to me, I think I want to say one more piece. The flip side could be if we what I think I'm hearing you say is, oh, I give it all so quick and I'm not feeling met really quick. I think is what I'm hearing. The contrast would be, do I need to reserve this until later? I guess my point would be maybe just slowing down how quickly it takes from nice to meet you to how much am I giving? Like slowing that initial process down. It's almost like, all right, let's get to know each other. Let's get to see each other. And like, because I find the more space, you can feel into the subtlety. So that subtlety is like, oh, how's my body feeling when I'm around him? Like, am I in my head when I'm there, or am I in my body when I'm with him? Because sometimes I've found this pattern where a really healthy integrated man shows up and a woman's actually scared because it's outside her normal pattern. And so she may be feeling like this doesn't feel good, but she's in her head, not in her body might be going, I feel so safe, but my head's going, this must be a lie. This must be fake. I don't know if I can trust him. But if I check my body's actually feeling really safe. Versus contrast, a woman could check all the man could check all the boxes. She could be like, this is the man, he's the one, but her body's saying, no, this something doesn't feel right. But she's going, but my it checks all the boxes. This he said all the right things, but she's not trusting body. So back to like slowing the pace, naturally becoming our most authentic, giving selves. And I would say one other piece is looking at dating like, are we in our best place when we're starting to date? Like if we're in a low moment wanting to feel connection, it's a very different come from than if we're like, oh, I can be with myself in my dark moments. I can be with myself in my loneliness. I can be with those places. And I'm actually opening up to dating when I'm blossoming is a very different place than if I'm needing to have a fix. So I think there's nuances as you're sharing, but I'm sharing more depth because if different women are listening from different places, I think it could be helpful for them to assess, like, oh, because there's a collective anger at the masculine right now, and it's valid. We've caused a lot of pain. But I'm a big advocate for like sovereignty and like, oh, how are we both co-creating this? Because
Yes.
it's so much more powerful when you're like, oh, wait, if it's not just on him, because if it's on him, then he has to fix it for me to feel good, or he has to do something. So I'm always waiting. But if I can shift it, then I'm in my total power. And so I'm just a really big advocate for that.
I love that you're saying that because I think that is what power is because I believe that no one can give me my power. It's innate. So I mean, you can't give it to me, a man can't give it to me. So I like to say sometimes I don't even reclaim my power. I just remember my power
Mm.
because it's already mine. Someone made me
Mhm.
forget it. So I love that you're saying that. And yes, there is a collective anger at the masculine. And that's why also pointed out like, can we co-create the solution instead? Because like, do we want to be in war with each other? Because I see so much depression, like we're so malnourished of intimacy and love and like do we really and also like that the okay, I don't know if it's only feminism, but like I can't see that I have gained something to be able to work like a man and like be hyper independent. Yes, I needed to kind of flip over to my hyper independence because I used to be more of the damsel in distress because I was depressed. I needed to be taken care of. It was all also unconscious, of course. But I mean, to come home to this balance within and with each other. And honestly, I feel like being angry at the masculine is just keeping you away from feeling your rage. And if we
Mhm.
take rage as an emotion, it's super powerful. So you're actually just blocking yourself from your power.
Mhm.
So, I mean, finger pointing, I think we need to, I feel like we are at this point in time where we need to just see this because yes, everything have probably filled its place in some way, but in truth, I mean, you from a male's perspective and me knowing I've hurt people, I've hurt men. Like I'm not perfect and I was maybe not conscious of it, but like we do it in different ways. And I also observed it. Like I have made more peace with my past, although I know I've acted in bad ways. But also for me, when I start to observe how women actually kind of, use their emotions, they do it even on me, they are manipulative, like, and I'm like, I don't want to be like that either. Where do I find my place? Because I do think awareness is kind of, with great powers come great responsibility because I could manipulate someone consciously if I wanted to, kind of, because I'm aware I can read patterns and like, But we can do it to, create connection. Oh, I can attune to you. I can feel your need with also not falling over to the other place where I'm abandoning myself. So it's always, the balance of it. But can we just say that we hurt each other and be like, how do we move forward?
Yeah, and I find it goes back to mom and dad. Like the men that are angry at mom, and it's even where most of like porn addiction comes from in men is like an unconscious anger at the feminine.
Mm.
Is there's a because it's like you didn't get your needs met, but you feel bad, let's say if you had a mom who really cared for you, right? So there's this mix of masculinity of like I'm mad at the feminine because I didn't get my needs met, and yet how could I be mad? Like she took care of me, and so there's this frustration, and I think the same thing comes from the feminine at times of like the masculine, like I didn't get my needs met from dad, but I'm glad that you were like I had a father, and some people had it worse, and so oftentimes, and if it wasn't mom or dad, it came from other other masculine energies, right? Or other feminine energies early on. So I think we're just learning to heal our relationship with the outward masculine feminine, but then also with our inward. Like I've had to do a lot of work of like because I think mom usually represents our nurture. So what was mom's relationship with her own self-care, her own nurture, her ability to feel and be receptive and be nurturing, and what was father's kind of protective instincts? And so we're or safety and nurture, right? So how do I nurture myself, but dependent on my relationship with mom and how she nurtured herself. My ability to create safety was dependent on my father's and our relationship. So I think we're finding a way back to ourselves and our own integration of masculine and feminine, which to me that is sacred union. Sacred union is where two people have done the inner work to like integrate their masculine and feminine parts, and now they're coming into union where they're like, what serves the union, right? So there's less, it has to be this way or that way, but they're both. I had a friend say it recently. She's in an amazing relationship. Like we both have our alpha and we both have a nurturing side, and so because we both have that, it's very well rounded. And sometimes she's like, sometimes my part comes out and sometimes his part comes out, but it works for the dynamic because you're both going to serve something greater. You're not going to get any more. You're going to serve something greater. So you're both coming with your gifts saying, what does the dynamic need? What's the energy? What's the flavor? What do we need moment to moment that serves it, right? And then it naturally progresses it much deeper.
Yeah, what comes to mind is like, and I said I recorded an episode with a woman just a few days ago. Like, feels like it's sometimes so much surface level polarity, but if we are just in this place of safety, um, and willingness, and we have done so much integrative work, wouldn't we just be our authentic selves and it would flow more naturally?
Which I think is true. And like the nature of relationship is that's why it's challenging for us. Like it's going to bring challenge. There's going to bring like those masculine, feminine poles are going to continue to like take us on a journey. But I think in general, again, I'm still learning myself, but I think in general, what I continue to see is we're just a lot nicer to each other. So we still move into contrast, or excuse me, we still contract. We still move into contraction together, but we're able to do so in much more loving ways and less. Um, it's almost like we start to go, oh, our traumas are over here, and we're together facing the trauma. Versus oftentimes what couples do is the trauma gets in the way of them fighting each other. And so it's like we more have a collective awareness like, oh, we're habitually patterned from our past traumas. Our nervous system reactions are going to be different. Our wounding is going to be different. That's still going to get triggered. But we're able to look at it like, how do we connect as a team to face our trauma together? Versus, I think a lot of couples get stuck and the trauma becomes the block against each other. And then there's all these walls and separations versus, so I think we start to look at it differently the more tools that we have.
Yeah. I don't know because I'm perfectly healed. So,
Like I've solved it all.
yes, I'm perfect. No, it's so true. And it becomes so frustrating at times, when you really want to connect with someone and you're trying your best to lean in, to move through your fears. And then you realize, oh my God, I fucked it up, or I didn't notice, or like, And I think the kindness is so important. I like to say that the good girl is nice to get something, but true kindness is what we are looking for. And yeah, and also yeah, as a woman, then just tap it back into the wifey or like the giving. Um, because honestly, when I started this podcast, it became such a healing journey for me, and I actually didn't realize how much I had closed my heart because I'm a really, touchy-feely person. I like intimacy, like with, people in general, like at the store and everything. It's just who I am. And I noticed becoming this like I'm not going to give this because what if I give this and get taken advantage of? So, I kind of, without even realizing it, made it kind of like this thing that I needed to hold on so tightly to. But that wasn't the problem, it was the standards. And then I think the same, just to connect it to what we were talking about in conflict or when we contract. I think also maybe it always comes up like, where did it start? Because I felt something, but maybe the man felt something. I don't know. You can like really not fully know because I can feel sometimes the man wants my nurturing, but maybe I was actually withholding it without realizing it, which makes them needy. And when they become needy, I become aggressive and like it becomes this whole shit show. And and I hate when I act out of character. Like I hate it. It is like not even do I maybe hurt someone or get hurt, but like that's the worst. Like feeling like, oh my God, and also it doesn't feel good for me because if I can't be my normal self and feel safe to be so, it started to feel like dating, and it started to feel like so much pressure too because like I love to connect. And maybe that's actually then what comes up would be also what makes a man feel safe to open up. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I love that example because you were like when you said like if he's wanting nurture from me, that would be an example of like I feel like we're moving. I like David Dida's three stages of like codependency, independence, and interdependence. And what I see oftentimes is like codependence is about me. So when we're going like, what do I need? I've fallen back into phase one, right? Which doesn't mean it's bad. It's just becoming aware of it. Phase two is like, what do we need? Right. So it's like, what do I need and what do they need? So we're more encompassing. And then phase three is like, what would love do? And so what really helps me think about it is if I'm going to get constantly that, or I'm giving to get, then where I'm in this transactional place versus a lot of the work has been like, okay, what do I need? How do I just keep giving it to myself without needing a woman to fill it? And what I feel like is shifting is the more I do that and actually mean it and find deeper ways to go there, um, the less the less attracted to codependency I am. It's almost more like the more I'm able to actually feel in my body, the difference of where somebody's more stabilized, let's call it, versus where there's some push pull energy early on, which early on I couldn't see it before because it would be like, it would attract me. And then I'd be into the actual dynamic because I needed that. It was like they would turn on their nurture or their feminine. There's something that I would turn on my protector provider. And now we're in this dynamic playing out roles versus the slower I go, the more I can feel the subtlety and really check in. Is this still coming from a place of giving where I don't want something back? And if I start to notice, like, oh, I'm now starting to get like, what am I getting back? That's a moment for me to check in and go, is this either the right dynamic or do I need to take more time for me? And can I lean into that? And like, so just having really authentic conversation. And to me, that's where I find the the level of work somebody's done is we can just have really authentic conversations around talking through needs. And that's what
Mhm.
shifted for me most recently in my dating. It's like it's less, you did, she did. It's more like, oh, what's your experience? What's my experience? What are our needs? Are we in actual compatibility or not in this timing or season? Or so oftentimes it's like, oh, we're just not on the right timing. Like we're both doing integrative work. We both have great tools to communicate. We can both express our needs without making each other wrong for what we're doing differently. And if we don't have inspiration to want to meet somebody's needs at the season we're in, or like we're just not compatible right now. Does it so? And that's what's helped quite a bit is um not engaging just to keep engaging to see where we get, but actually really looking at what's here now and exploring that to say, okay, like the pattern, I find the patterns there in the beginning. So it's like we don't need to always wait 6 months to get into be like, oh, there's the pattern. I find there's real subtleties that show up almost immediately. And then it's really saying, okay, is this the pattern or the dynamic that I'm wanting to be in or no? Right. But that gives so much more ownership because it's like, oh, I'm seeing it all along. I just have to trust myself and not like abandon myself, future pace it, like dismiss any part of me. I really have to be clear, bring my full truth early on and see how do we engage early on with conflict? How do we engage with this isn't working for me or here's what I would need to go deeper, right? That's authentic relating versus just leaving or just future pacing or doing some other dynamic like really deep authentic relating is deep revealing where we just get to keep revealing and then there's no right or wrong. It's just like can we continue to keep meeting each other as we reveal deeper or no?
Oh,
Right?
and that just feels so good. You mean to be able to express yourself and, because we have our things.
Hmm.
But to be able to know this is me, this is my strength, this is my shit, and this is how I'm working on it. And this is what I need. Like, I mean, maybe not on day one, like, here's my resume. Like everything about me. I think sometimes the safety like is so important, but also I do believe that it's magic in the mystery. So I don't know how you feel around that, but for me it's been like to navigate that too because otherwise it's like I do love the mystery, like I loved that the magic unfolds and like yeah.
That's the balance. I feel like that's the great balance. Like, okay, there's enough questions going on to know there's some stability, and then there's also the magic of the moment unfolding moment to moment, which creates excitement. Like, what's next? What's coming?
Exactly. Exactly, otherwise it's like yeah, yeah, having both. I agree. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you also said something. I really feel like we have gone so deep into this and it feels really good. Um, but you said something about giving to get, and I would really like to tap into this because I I don't like to give when I feel like someone gives to get, and I know you don't either. And you said like men feels this also. Could you from your perspective tell me how that feels and what?
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess from like a masculine perspective, how do you feel when somebody's giving to get? You almost feel it doesn't feel authentic. Like that's like it almost feels like there's an energy behind it versus a freedom behind it, right? It's almost like probably how a woman feels a man like he's talking to you, but he really wants in your pants, and you can feel that energy behind it. I find that energy that we're feeling, that the intention behind why we're giving, you start to feel that intention sooner on, so it misses its authenticity, right? Like you can actually, because I feel like the more integrative we become, the more feeling you become, right? So it's like that's what integrating your as a man integrating more of your feminine does is it teaches you to feel more. So you're able to feel and attune and feel more who a woman is, which means you can feel more her intent, you can feel more where she's at. Like you're able to just like feel a lot more. Um, and so I think those are what men often talk about the men I know doing integrative work talk about is oftentimes feeling when the women are in their what we call it is more like maiden or princess versus a woman who feels more like in her queen, right? And the differences are that could be one of them is like giving to get could be one of them versus authentic giving. There's also I see just a lot of times they're using their feminine radiance. That could be a giving to get. right? Like I'm going to use my sexual energy or my body, or I'm going to use certain things because I know this is going to get me validation or energy or attention or something. Like but you start to feel that, and it becomes probably similar to how women experience men when they're like in a space like looking to as a like a little bit more predatory,
Oh,
where they're like, who am
yes.
I going to consume? It doesn't feel like they're selecting you out of the crowd to be like, who is this woman?
You're not
I want to go
special.
to.
It's like,
Yeah, it's how it starts to feel to the masculine flipped. The more a woman uses her body or her energy or her radiance to get something, it starts to feel the same way as that predatory man in the space, just wanting to sleep with any woman he can get his hands on. It feels very similar to the masculine. So instead of initially it kind of hijacks you like, oh wow, what is this? What's the shiny thing? But then the more integrative work you do, you start to go, oh, she actually needs something. She's doing that to get. She's
mm,
not doing that to because she feels really good and she's being radiant. There's a different energy when a woman is just feeling herself and doing it because it makes her feel really good versus when there's an intention behind it. You literally feel it and it feels very similar to my guess is what men would do. And so that's what a lot of men talk about is the women I used to like go for on Instagram or social media or be mesmerized with. Now it's like a turn off and it's shifting a lot of where men are drawn once they do more integrative work because they can see now where they couldn't see. They were just hijacked before. Like, oh, it was like a hijacking tool. Nervous system's hijacked, I'm already in. Versus, oh no, let me like same thing. Like if a man's done a feminine cleanse and taken more time or a break from women, you get to see how affected by women. Like we're deeply affected by women. I'd say like 95% of everything a man does is for women. This is like the counterintuitive thing that women I think don't often realize is we love to serve. So that's even a big reason why I'm a big support for women starting to value more integrative work because the current culture we have is based on what women respond to. So if women respond to the more financial success a guy has, the more high value external qualities he has, because she sees that as safety, the more she responds to that, that becomes what men value.
mm,
Um, and then women are now caught up in the same cycle, but they've created the same piece. So I feel like the ownership is if women started to value the integrative work over the financial success, men will all start to adapt themselves to actually do the inner work for healthy partnership because our deepest need is to procreate. So I think that's where I see really helping women now start to change the narrative will automatically shift men versus going in and shifting men is a very different vehicle because we're so shifted from our culture. But so that's my big one of my big intentions behind the work of it because it changes the game, right? It's like if you see
I
men, I'll give you one more little piece. When I was bodybuilding, which I transformed my body, and in doing that process, all the men were like, are all these women paying attention to you now? So the interesting conversation is the men is who attracted. Women were like, some women don't even like it. They were like, oh, you're getting too much attention, or I like to be the one that like I noticed all this different narrative around what I previously thought, because that was an external high value trait to like, oh, can I have this thing? But it was for the I realized it was men because men value if they have that, they're a better partner for women. But I realized the women didn't care as much. It was like a and some of them were like off put by it because they're like, oh, if he spends that much time, then he's too focused on himself. Like there was just all this stuff from women that I learned that was very different than a masculine perspective. So I'm just a big advocate. How do we start to change what we value in society, and the men will automatically change around it?
I love that. So it comes back to like we women hold the power. Like,
That's it. That's it.
so what are
That's
we
it.
fighting about?
That's it. But that's the whole thing. When you actually get that, you're like, oh, we're holding the power, but then we're losing our power by giving it away, or then and I will say we live in a patriarchal society, and that's a process a woman goes through. Is she goes through the heroine's journey, which is a disconnect from the feminine, over identification with masculine. So oftentimes she's trying to give in masculine ways, not really seeing the value of her femininity. That's such a gift. And then she has to descend down to like refine the goddess and reawaken her feminine attributes and actually start to value them. And when she deeply values them, they're so deeply valued to us. And then she realizes it's a gift that she's giving. And when she actually gets the gift, it becomes she's more mindful of her time, right? It's like how would I describe it? Tell me if is it a different story of a man that can just provide but doesn't realize the value he's giving by doing it. So if I showed you two examples, one man that let's say he's financially successful that can just handle things but doesn't really see it as his gift, so he may just say, "Hey, take the card and get it." Versus a man who's like, "Oh no, I'm going to intentionally take the time. I know my energy, my time, the generousness that I give is a gift and I'm only going to give it to who values it." And
Mm.
so how would you feel him differently of like, hey, if I'm giving this to you, I'm here. Like I see the value. I'm very mindful of where I get this time and energy. If it's to you, I'm going to be very intentional versus a man who's just like, yeah, yep. It's like one feels very different. It's the same with the woman. A woman who's like, either giving all of her nurture away or hasn't identified with her nurture versus a woman who's like, oh yeah, I can turn my radiance on to bring light into the deepest darkness. And I'm going to be super, or just bring play to a moment that's dull, or I can bring anger to a moment that needs to shift. Like I can be all things. And I know this is all a gift. So I'm going to be really mindful of like who's sharing the gift, who sees and appreciates it as a gift. So I feel like the more we see and appreciate it in us, the more we're discerning on who we give the gifts to. And it kind of shortens that wide open narrative to like a smaller gate.
Yeah, I love that. But then what comes up is like, so how do we connect that we should be bringing our full selves in the dating process, but at the same time we should be discerning on who we give it to? Like, how do we create that?
But that's to me, that's the balance is like I'm gonna be who I'll try to give it in my own personal like it's like I'm gonna be the man that I'm gonna be as I move through the world. So I'm committing to doing that. So it doesn't matter if I'm around friends, it doesn't matter if I'm around a woman that I'm dating, I'm still gonna be the same man. So I have to decide how am I gonna live and how am I gonna show up, and this is who I am, right? So if that's how I'm living, then as I start to date, I just go really slow in the dating process, which to me, slow looks like I just lengthen everything out. So there's like a slow getting to know, but I'm still being me. I'm still giving generously. I'm just doing it in small bite-sized chunks, right? As I'm like learning to kind of feel where somebody's at and if we're meeting each other. So for me, because the receptivity comes quick or it doesn't come quick. So that's how I find is I'm very attuned to the subtleties. And I'll usually give it like a couple dates because somebody may be just really nervous, right? Or like, there's things that show up. So like giving it a couple dates, but you'll feel the recurring pattern underneath because it's who we are. And we're either meeting each other in that receptivity or something's off. And it starts to become a little bit easier. Just trusting the body. Am I present? How do I feel in their presence?
Yeah.
Right.
I what had come up for me, and I just started dating again, but um, it feels sometimes like some get a bit addicted to that radius, like the nurture, and like because I can feel myself, although I'm nervous, I feel myself being pretty open the first dates, and it feels like some go crazy. But maybe
Yeah.
I don't, maybe I'm really feeling like I'm trying to be thoughtful, but now I had a moment again where I'm like, okay, I need to withdraw and like see where
This,
I'm from.
well, this is what I'd say is like a woman controls the pace.
Yeah.
So,
And
so, so, so you can be the most nurturing, feminine, radiant woman, but just go at a slow pace, right? And if he tries to override those boundaries, it also shows you he's going to override boundaries, right? So like a man who's patient, a man who may be very verbally like, "Wow, you're amazing." He could be very communicative, but he's going to still slow the pace because one pattern of like avoidant, a lot of women are like, where are these avoidant men? Is they come in as fast seducer. And so a woman who's just in her feminine that is like, let me put this together. I'm a big advocate of saying, like, what do I want in an ideal partner? And what are the top 4 or 5 qualities that are a must for me? If I know that, then when I'm dating right off the beginning, I'm seeing, are we in alignment with these top 4 or 5 values? You can still do it through play and through conversation. It doesn't have to be like drill sergeant, but that's a woman bringing awareness, which would be more masculine qualities, bringing some direction to say, hey, let me get clear. Are we in alignment in these things before I continue to invest all my time and energy? Like, can I do that playfully over a couple of conversations, dates, phone calls, text messages? Like, how do I start to see this? Because what I find a lot of women do is if you're in your feminine, you're just in your receptivity to the moment. And if he's playful, he's charismatic, he's saying all the right things. And she's like, I felt so good. We had so much fun. And then she creates the fantasy of who he is versus actually discovering and finding out. And oftentimes emotionally unavailable men will love bomb in the beginning. And then when it gets depth, then they'll pull back. So if you're slowing things down, you also will feel the subtleties. If he's over the top love bombing, it's almost like, all right, I'm going to slow that down a little bit more. Can he step into this little period with me? Right. So it's like, that's what I like about the slowness is the slowness allows you to feel the subtleties. Am I like extra captivated? Is there a weird dynamic here? Or is it just like feeling really secure? And if I need to create a little space, how does he move into the space with me? Or does he override it? Does he try to do something with it? Is he trying to control it? Or is he just like, all right, I'll check in about here, or I'll check in like so I don't know if this is making sense, but I'm wanting to get to the energy of it. Is the energy of secure feels exciting, but it feels patient, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like that exciting patience is it'll continue to ring true in your body with the in the space. And sometimes we're in the moment, we can't always feel. We need a little time to like check in. So like you're kind of going in to like check in and how do you be as present as you can? Where are you feeling him? Because there may be I've met like now that I teach women more of this, like I see men very differently. And I'll meet a man who's great. He's financially successful, really good looking guy, so charismatic. And I'm like, this guy's 10 years out of being ready for a relationship. But to any woman that on a date, she's going to be like, he checks all the boxes. He's good looking. He's charismatic. He's playful. He takes up space. He makes a bunch of money. But they're looking all external. If you look at him in integrative wise, he hasn't done shadow work. He hasn't faced parts of himself. He's not emotionally regulated. He's redirecting conversations. Like there's these subtle things where she asks a deeper question, he's going to override it or change it because he can't look at those parts of himself yet. And he's going to move it to something else that's playful and distractive, but he thinks he's healed. Does that make sense? So it's
Yeah,
like,
because you're pinpointing the exact thing I'm saying. And this feels sometimes like a curse for me because I feel like I have to play myself down because I am a fierce mirror for a lot of men, and they become passive aggressive. They are saying one thing, then they're saying another, and I'm really aware. And
Mhm.
like, that's when I need to like, thank you for pointing this out. I just need to walk away because what can a
Well,
girl?
it's either, well, there's two things. One, if it's a clear that, walk away, or two, sometimes we're projecting on what it is. And so I find clarification
Mm,
in the clarity call, which again, this is more masculine from my opinion as well, is like bringing aware every time we bring awareness or take it deeper. But I find whoever's the more well-versed practitioner is the one who needs to lead that. So if you have more awareness, you're going to have to lead more of the conversations. And then somebody that can meet you there, to me, is what's important. Like they don't have to be, even in my own dating, they don't have to meet me exactly where I'm at in my growth. They just have to be the pattern has to be there where I'm feeling my top goals are met. And so, as an example, if you're feeling passive aggressive, that you could say, hey, can I share with you what's coming up for me? And that could be a great part to saying, like, here's what my experience is. I'm feeling you're saying this, but you're meaning this. Can you give me more clarity why that's like bringing some awareness to it? And he's going to respond in a way that either makes you feel safer and he's going to take like ownership, like, oh, wait, you know what? You're right. I was really nervous. I'm actively working on this area XYZ, or he's going to deflect, dismiss, turn it around. So my point is by bringing that in is how part of how I find we heal. It also forces us to bring the awareness to the conversation so we're more selective in the future. So as
yes.
an example, if you have to bring it all, now you're revealing yourself and revealing in vulnerability what's coming up for you. And the quicker you bring it, you get to see, is he emotionally stable? How can he lean into conflict? Is he welcoming this with you? Is he standing in ownership when something comes up? Like, so you get to see that so much quicker. And if he can't, then it's much easier to go, oh, okay, I brought this and he ran away, or I brought this and he shut down, or I brought this. Now it's an easy walk away. But my invitation for you to be like, could I practice revealing myself instead of saying he's XYZ and leaving? Any future, he's either going to do it and I'll see what happens in the future, or he's not going to do it and I'm going to walk away. But can I just keep revealing my heart and see who can meet me there? Do you
Yeah.
see how that feels a little bit different? Because then it forces you to go, I can't be in here. I actually have to say, here's what's coming up in me. Can I express it with you? And he's either going to know how to meet you there or he's not. And that's more of a clear indicator on the work he's done because integrative men will be able to meet you in that and you'll feel safer. Like you'll feel like, oh, I can actually relax into bringing what's coming up for me and he'll meet me. Unintegrated is some pattern will show up.
I feel like it's okay when say I want to talk about something is more about me, I'm having a bad day or whatever, then they can really show up. But if I want to reflect something back, and I might not have done it in the best way, but I don't scream, like I don't like I'm just okay. I don't know if can I say to someone, last night when you said this, I felt like it was really passive aggressive.
So, how I find to bring that up in a way that can land is how do you own a part of you and your nervous system that makes it how you're wired, not what he did right or wrong.
Hmm.
So,
Oh.
so as an example, if you said like like passive aggressive energy to me is like you're saying this, but you're not really saying what you want to say. You said this instead. So it's like, where does that show up in your past? And why is that so important for you that somebody's direct? So as an example, you could bring something up and say, hey, I've actively been working on this part of me, and one of my triggers is where I project a story of passive aggressive energy. And so I really value direct communication. And so is it okay if I share a part of my heart with you so I could get more curious to understand what's going on here? So it starts off in curiosity. And in that conversation, like I'm just trying to think of an actual example. I'll give you another example. Maybe this is easier to like see the flip side of it. I had a woman who I on one of our dates, I invited her. I go to a church locally, and I was like, "Hey, let me know if you want to go to church." And she was like, "Oh, I may want to go sometime." But that's how I felt the receptivity. I didn't feel like, "Yes, let me know." I felt like, "Oh, I may want to go." And so for me, if it's not a like clear, then I'm like, "All right, I'll just keep inviting her in the future." Well, I went to church that next day. And then afterwards, she said, hey, can I bring something to you? This has really been coming up for me of wanting to express my truth. One of my wounds is lack of follow through. And so I just want to express this because I feel really seen and held when somebody checks in on me and follows through. And when you shared this thing and didn't follow back up, I felt dropped. And I was like, so again, it's the context of thank you. One, I'm going to validate her. Thank you so much for sharing what your truth is. I honor you for bringing the conversation here. I'm always willing to go into this conversation. And then we got to dive into what that felt like. And for me, it was great because I had to lean in to go, hey, I can work a little bit more at checking in. And part of my wounding is I don't want to be dad. So like if I ask you and you don't know, then I'm going to take that as a no. Like, so I don't want to have to keep following up. Like, how do you feel today? How do you feel today? Like, if I ask you and you don't give me a clear yes, then I'm going to assume it's a no. And so I don't want to have to be dad and have to figure out for you. So I also need you to be clear with me. And if it's, I don't know, then I'm just going to assume it's a no. So we both got, but again, this is me leaning into my nice guy would have said, "Oh yeah, anytime XYZ happens, I'm just going to have to show up and do it for you." The part of me is like, that doesn't feel good either. Like I'm not your dad. I'm your partner. So like, or I'm curious to see if we can have partner. So I need you to be clear when I ask you, or be okay if I don't. But there was room for me also to go, I'm learning now. This is a wound of hers. How can I be clear in my communication? How could I have asked her in that moment, hey, is this a yes or no? So that's kind of what I got to. Like the vagueness, I assumed was a no. I could have then said, "Hey, is that a yes or no for this Sunday?" So there was
Right.
room for me to grow through that as well. But that's an example of a different conversation, but I think a similar framing that may be helpful of how it felt to me I was actually really grateful she brought it up because I want to learn how she's wired. Does that
Mm.
make sense? So, and that relationship didn't work out. It wasn't a fit, but it was great practice early on because it was really healthy communication. Does that help give context of like,
Yes.
again, do you see even like when you bring it up, he's either going to be open to it or not open to it, depending on how much work he's done. Like he's either going to want to know, go deeper, but it is on your end. One, can you be in your heart and do it from your heart, which women often don't do it from their heart. They do it from frustration, anger. And if you do that, he's going to meet you with anger. So how do you reveal your heart? Like my question would be, how did you feel if it felt passive aggressive? Like, could you really connect to the part of you that felt, I felt like I didn't get to feel your truth.
Yeah, 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 because it's always, I dated a man and I don't know if it's a projection, but I could feel sometimes like he had a hard time sometimes expressing, and I do too. So I mean, it wasn't all on him. But um, when someone expresses to me, even if it's actually with anger or like, okay, let's take that back. Like one thing he told me once was like, because he did have a shutdown. So I told him I can understand how you're feeling. I won't chase you, but I'll be here if you like need to process things. And like I was open to a comeback. And a week later he came back and then he started to, send me like, oh, good morning and stuff like that. And I was like, hey, uh, okay, I can't explain all the details. Like, so I told him I can't just keep on texting you now when you went away before we talk to each other. So
Beautiful.
so I told him like, so he asked me like, when can you meet? And we set the date. And then I had no contact with him because I can't, give my time or energy to someone who disappears and then thinks he can walk into my life. And the same thing happened then we were talking and I could feel, when I think you have probably experienced this, when you can feel they are real, but then they withdraw into their facades and stuff like that. So he was like from the beginning very, I want you to feel safe with me, saying all the right words. Now like I don't feel safe to open up, yet because I don't know you and like stuff like that. But you really want to believe someone. But we were talking one day and having dinner, and I don't know if asked him or if he asked me like around fears. So I shared my fears, or like I really want to connect, but I still have fears of intimacy and stuff like that. And later that night, I had a thing, so I was going home, and he took my words and said, like, because he asked me what I wanted, and I'm like, yeah, well, I have a meeting. What do you want? You have to express that. And he was like, well, I would like you to stay over. And I told him like I have a meeting and like yeah. So he took my words and used them against me now that I open up and like, all the same words. And that is a huge red flag for me. So it's like the next day when I woke up, I had a stomach ache and like it didn't feel good to me. And that's when I told him in a good way, but it was like, I have a stomach ache. And he was like, first not meeting me. And it was like, okay, forget it. And I was like, but you're not listening to me. If you would listen, I could explain how I mean. And then I just told him, like, I opened up and you took my words and said it in that way, it felt really passive aggressive to me. That was what happened.
Great. I think that's what we're learning to do is we're learning how to continue to just open and bring our authentic communication. And the more we learn ourselves, the more we can communicate how we're wired. And then that's really what we're choosing. Like if we skip all the big steps that usually happen, we're really saying, can I be with this person's nervous system for the long haul?
Yeah,
And
and I felt like I felt like he couldn't hold his turn on or like whatever because being with him sometimes when he was excited by me was like breathtaking for me because I'm really intuitive. So if someone gets that nervous and tries to hold back, and like it would be better even to you just take it out so we can, but not to make him wrong, but like it becomes, I can almost not breathe. And I don't want to mother someone either from my end. So one time was like, how are you feeling? So I try to ask questions instead because I don't want to, go into fixing or yeah, so it's like it's good you're a bit far away, like well come close. Like, so it's that easy because I from my end too don't want to start mother someone because that doesn't feel good to me, but I also don't want to leave someone hanging. So it's like, yeah.
But I find these are the small subtleties of why you slow it down to go, let me check in. Is the mother part of me coming online? Is this part like how do I just continue to stay true to myself? And that's where I find like the saying no, the body will start to tell you what's a no. That's why the head will get confusing. The head's like, I don't know about this, I don't know about this, or that like, but the body's just a clear yes or no. And I
Yeah.
find like the more we can listen to the body, it could check all the right boxes, but the body just says no. You're like, all right. Like that's the hardest part is really just trusting the body because the body will really take us moment by moment. And if we need more clarity, we can ask some questions to get more clarity from the body. But especially if you're that intuitive, your body's going to tell you everything really quickly. It's just, can we listen? Can we slow it down and listen, which is the hard part.
Yeah, well, I guess, they can be open on the first dates. But this man also told me that you would retract into his bubble. So he even told me with his words. So, it was even, yeah. Yeah, so anyways, um, we don't even have to dive deeper into my dating stories. But thank you so
Mhm.
much, Joshua. This have just been so amazing to have you here, and I uh, I got some pointers on where I can take a more honest look on myself too. So I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you. It was such a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.